sure if it's like useful to all of you. How many of you all here are songwriters? Okay, cool. That's all right there. If you're okay there, very good. Yes, don't be shy. If you're writing a song, you're a songwriter, okay?
If you've written one song, you're a songwriter.
Yeah, that's right. If you've written one song, you're a songwriter, okay? What about musicians? How many musicians have you got here? Oh, very good, very good. What about tech people? Sound engineers.
People who like music. Hey.
Okay. Some raise hands for all. Okay, and the others all music lovers. Yeah, very good. Okay, I hope you're music lovers. That's why you're on a music store on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Okay. Yeah. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So, for each track,
yeah,
you have background loops that you're recording.
Yeah.
That you're replaying. What software are you using to do?
So the question was, what software are we using? We're using Ableton Live.
Very good. Turn it right. And you notice
Ableton Live.
we're quite unusual in the world of musicians that we actually use PCs. A lot of musicians use Macs.
On Windows, yes.
Yeah, using Windows. I mean, we've been Windows users all along, although when we first started, I mean, we were introduced to Macs as well, but we've always just preferred the Windows environment.
And the synthesizers we use are the software synthesizers, VST synthesizers like the Silent One synthesizer, and also the Korg series of synthesizers, because Korg, in addition to making hardware, turned many of their vintage analog synths into software versions. So we've got one here. That's the Korg Monopoly, which is a 25-year-old synth, but now available in software. Thanks, great question.
Great question. Any other questions? We started with a technical question. Yes?
When you decide to perform live, assuming you have lots of different tracks in the final song, how do you decide which ones you're going to do live versus which ones you're going to leave?
Oh, that's a great question. We first decide how we're going to arrange the song for live playing, because the tracks that we finally release are very studio oriented, and we layer on probably about 10 to 20 different lines of music on at any second, which just doesn't make sense when playing live, because you can't hear all of it. There's no point. It just makes the whole thing sound very messy if you're playing in an open environment.
Yeah, it depends on the venue as well. So yeah, it really depends on the venue. If you're playing at a club, like when we play in a club, you could practically play the whole track as it was when we released it in the album. But usually we end up playing in smaller venues, or let's say if you're doing Esplanade, you've got open spaces. Yeah, so a really hard kind of dance club sound doesn't quite work well in that space. So
we have learned the hard way.
Yeah, we have learned the hard way, because we originally would have taken what we recorded and we just played it there, and then we found like, oh man, there was just too many things in terms of sound. It's bouncing back, and it was horrible. So we kind of learned the hard way that every venue that we play, we have to change how the song sounds. And for example, like the songs that we played are shorter versions of what's on the album, because we also know we're playing to a new audience who's not familiar with our music. So, no point giving you the full song with all the bits in between, and there's some more riffs and, like solo bits and all that. We kind of shortened the songs because it's a new audience. So every venue that you play, you got to take into account the sound of it, but also taking the audience, and you may have to shorten the song and edit it as is needed. Yeah. And then once you've decided and rearranged it, then you decide on what you want to play live, and it depends also on how many instruments you want to lug to the venue.
So this one was we felt quite comfortable that we had the afternoon. Okay, don't worry, you're not here for the whole afternoon, just for an hour. But so we felt comfortable in bringing this much gear, so we figured we could play this many different sounds. And if we were playing in somewhere where we have only 15 minutes, we only want to go in with one computer, one keyboard, and that's it. We just choose probably the bare minimum, and then we will, for deciding what to play, we'll usually play the distinct melodies, the ones that have a feeling with it, because at the end of the day, besides letting you enjoy it, also we want to enjoy playing it when we're playing live. So we don't want to try and play something which is humanly not possible, on one hand. On the other hand, we don't want to hold down a chord for the entire song, which is personally very boring as well. So it has to be something that's fun to play, as well as fun for you to listen to. Thanks, great question again.
Any other questions? Yes.
So why have you chosen to release an album this time instead of doing
I think, oh, that's a very good question. When we first started, the reason for an EP was because we were really trying to find our sound and trying to figure out, you know, we did electronic music and we wanted really, but what kind of electronic music are we doing? And the other important thing for us was like, can we find somebody to help produce our music? Because as musicians, you're listening to your music all the time. You want somebody who can give you some kind of constructive feedback and tell you what's working and what's not working, especially on the sound of it. And we actually went around and tried to look in Singapore at that time, and I think it was 2010 when we released our EP, so maybe around 2009. We were saying like, okay,
First
so who
EP was
does...
09.
The first EP was 09, so maybe 08, 09, we were like, so who does electronic music in Singapore? And we had very, very few names
In
on the
08?
list. Yeah, in 08.
Not- okay,
very, very
today-
few names in 08. Now we've got a lot more producers.
Yeah.
But back then it was like very few. And when we asked a couple of them, they said, well, actually we don't produce other people, we just do our own music. And so we needed a product. And that's why the first album was an EP. We just had to come up with something that we had to go through the whole process of recording ourselves, of trying to get the whole sound down, you know, mixing and mastering and everything, just to get a product there that we could then use. So that's why the first one was an EP.
It's experiment.
It was an experiment, really, for the first album. Subsequently, when we did the second album, also, I think at that time we just felt that we weren't ready to do a full length. But it was always the idea to eventually do a full length, because I think what you'd get in a full length is we have 10 tracks on the full length album, and in the previous EPs we had 4 to 5 tracks on each one. The sound we hope the sound is a little bit more cohesive, and in terms of who you are as a musician, it's a little bit clearer. But I think the reason for the second album also being an EP was we were still experimenting and really trying to get our sound there. I think if we had we could have dug up 10 songs and we could have pieced them together and just put it out as a full length. But I think if you had listened to that album at that time, it wouldn't have been as cohesive in that sense. I mean, having said that, this album that we completed, and we listened back and we're like, it's still not perfect, but I think it's part of the process of you know, your sound, you know, and who you are as a musician. Yeah.
So just you touched on that you were trying to find your sound. Was that in terms of your songwriting structure, tempo, instruments that you used, or is it a mix of all of those?
All of the
I
above.
think all of the above, because when I started writing, because I write most of the songs on the album, I realized that, especially for a first album, and I also usually recommend an EP, because sometimes the first album, you're just trying to get out your first stuff. And usually your first stuff could be a bit angsty and, you know, all the first things that you're writing as a songwriter. And I realized that I wrote very stream of consciousness, and there's lots of words and stuff like that, and then setting that to music. By the time we came down to like the songs you heard, you actually got choruses and stuff. My first album was like there was no choruses. It kind of drove him a bit nuts. He's like, I can't do it. There's no choruses in these songs.
Why keep changing chords?
I kept changing chords because there's so many words and so many ideas going on. So it was really trying to find the voice. And I think the first few albums was just get what you want to say out there, and then you're more settled and comfortable with what you really want to say. You've got the angst out of the way, so now I can get down to the other songwriting.
This
you know,
is not even counting the music that we wrote in school.
Yeah.
That's the really teen angsty stuff which nobody will ever hear.
Thank God.
Thank goodness, you know.
We just subjected them at that time to it, you know.
Yep.
You got school performances
We don't
and
count
stuff.
those.
Yeah. And the other thing was the style of music, because electronic music, I mean, it's changed so much. Even trying to, when we first launched our first album, and then we have to list it and put like tags. So what do we call our music? You know, we can't call it synth pop, which is this old 80s term, is a particular kind of sound, and synth pop means something different today. And then electro pop means something else, and then we had like electronica, which meant something else altogether, and you couldn't just put pop. So just trying to figure out where do we fit, which category. It took a while of trying to figure out, because as a musician these days, you also have to market your music. So if you want to market your music, you got to market them to where is your audience, because anybody can access music anywhere online, and there's gajillion musicians out there. How are they going to find you? So you've got to make it easier for your potential audience to find you online. And so as much as you don't want to categorize your music, you still do have to categorize it, because if you expect to sell music, or at least get a few people to listen to your music, you've got to figure out, where's my closest market? You know, where do I try and fit in? So that took a while to to kind of, and we still haven't got it as an exact science because electronic music constantly evolves.
We actually, between 2008 and now, if you realize, we've actually gone through the EDM spike and then the burst. Basically, EDM is generally considered to be quite over.
Yeah.
So if we had released in the middle of the EDM thing, it would have been totally different as well.
Yeah.
Just on your songwriting process, this is my last question. On your songwriting process, how do you know when it's finished?
Actually, songs are never finished. The question is, am I comfortable with it to let somebody else hear it? I think that's kind of, for me, what it is. When we start writing, because either I write on the piano, you know, and I'm tinkering around with stuff, and usually that's quite of a raw sound, and then we kind of sequence it. Your pads, don't put it on pads. Yeah, so what normally happens then is that by the time we record it, it's usually a version 9 or something. But that's going to recording, and you go to the studio, you lay down the vocals, and mix and master the track. But as I said, subsequently when you perform the song, you're still playing with it, you know, because like I said, whether it's the audience or it's the venue, or sometimes just a little bit more to tinker. But the song is generally complete in that sense. When you feel, I could let somebody else listen to this, you know, and hear it as I intend it to be heard. Yeah. So maybe on that question, we just kind of go through a bit of our songwriting process. Usually when we're writing songs, I mean, inspiration hits you at any time. And one of the most important tools I have actually is my phone. The reason why is because I record everything, any inspirations and all that on my phone. And I was going through some of my old recordings, and I said, like, the last 3 months I have 20 recordings on my phone. And one of them, for example, was me walking past, I think it was a Ge Tai or some neighborhood block performance in the HDB estate, and somebody was singing some Hokkien Gua, you know. But it was a really interesting Hokkien chorus. I have no idea what song this is. And so I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I just recorded it. It wasn't a very good recording. And then I sang into my phone the melody. And that's just something which, am I going to copy it and use it? I don't know. But it was just a nice tune, like, na, 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 na. It's just a nice little ditty there. Another time, when I was playing, I have a 2-year-old, so he likes to play on the piano, and so he's sitting on me, and I'm just playing like do, re, mi, fa, sol, you know, C, D, E, da, 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 on the piano with him. And as I started tinkering on the piano, I started coming up with something. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. And it started just with playing with him. And so I just grabbed my phone and I recorded it. Of course, he's like going, ah, in the background, but I'm like, never mind, this is a song I'm inspired. And you know, you just try and record it down. So having the phone with me is always very useful. I've got a recording in there of me walking from, walking to the bus stop, and a riff just got into my head. It was a bass line in my head. And so I just, at least they don't think you're nuts because they think you're on the phone. So I'm going doom, 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 you know, singing a bass line into the phone. So the phone is, or just any kind of recording device, for me as a songwriter is really important. Now, out of all those 20 recordings that I put down, I think there is one that's usable. And that's the thing about songwriting. I took screenwriting when I was studying overseas, and one of the things my screenwriting teacher said is that if you want to be a screenwriter, you have to write every day. You have to sit in front of the computer, and even if nothing happens, you've just got to go through that process every single day. Inspiration doesn't hit you every day, but you got to be doing something every day if you want to be a writer. And I think the same thing happens with music. Whether you're singing, whether you're just sitting in front of the keyboard and you're tinkering, you've got to do something every day musically. And yeah, maybe 10 days, 15 days, 20 days, nothing happens, but maybe on the 21st day or 22nd day, something hits you and it might be just a little doodle. And I've got a folder on my computer called Doodles, and it's full of doodles, and I will use, like, on average, maybe 1 out of 50 of those doodles might actually become a song. So you just keep churning and churning and churning and churning. Many, many, many songs, even complete songs. Out of, like, you write 100 complete songs, and maybe you can find like 10 or 20 good ones. That's for me. Maybe you're really great songwriter and every song is usable, but not for me. I've got to go through that process to get to where we want to get. Yeah. So I think one of the songs, the last song that we played just now, that was a song which happened when I was overseas. I did not have access to a keyboard, and so I sung it into my phone, just the melody line. And then when I came back to Singapore and went into my studio, I laid down the vocal tracks. For some reason, I didn't want to put it down on piano. I just wanted to do it on vocal, and so I sang different parts of the vocal track. So I think Ben's got it. So this is like what the original was.
The original version.
Running, run, run, 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 running, run.
Okay, you can see the song's not called Falling, it's called Running Out of Time. That's how it was the first version.
Run, run, running, run, run, running, run, run, running, run, run, running, run, run, running.
Yeah, so that's what was first recorded. And then that got passed over to Ben, poor thing. I said, you got to work with that. It's usually easier for him because I actually play the whole thing out on the piano with the different parts and everything. And then he starts to work on it. So what he normally does is, what do you normally do, Ben?
So what I do is when she then says, I wrote a new song. I said, okay. Then I open the file and says, oh, okay. Let me see what this means. And then so I'll try and I'll it'll be in Ableton Live usually, and load up the synths which I'm most familiar with, Silence or one of the Korg synths like the M1, which has a lot of very usable sounds, because I don't want to get myself stuck in that loop where a lot of people say, oh, let me try new sounds, then about 3 hours later, I haven't done anything. So I make sure I just try with the sounds that I have and basically build up a basic arrangement that sounds like a more with beats, with bass line, with pads, and then I let her hear it, and then we get the response, huh? Why did you do that? And so this will bounce back and forth and say, why don't you actually do something like this instead? That you play something, because the instruments, adding on the new instruments will give her ideas, and then, okay, I'll take that back, and we bounce back and forth, and somewhere around version 5 or 6 or maybe 7, we'll have something, okay, I think we'll choose this and we'll start working on it. And then we'll start working on, okay, this particular sustained pad, it's okay, not bad, but we could do a better one. Then I go and build a better pad. Or this bass line, oh, it sounds too cheesy. Okay, work on the bass line. But we need to establish what the full sound of it is going to sound like in the process of arrangement, bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, so that's essentially like for songwriting. Sometimes, like I said, you know, if you want to write, you've got to do it every day. And sometimes I just sit in front of the keyboard and I have no idea. There's nothing's happening, nothing's working. And I just like to tinker on the keyboard. And I especially love to tinker on the black keys. On the black keys, just because if you know keyboards or pianos, the black notes, when you play them together, there's no dissonance. So yeah, so you can just like, and you know, nothing really clashes terribly. And this was one way how I came up with the next song. Just playing with it, and I'm like, oh, this is quite cool. That's quite cool too. But this sounds even nicer. Yeah, you know. Yeah. So it was just by playing around sometimes, and sometimes, many times, nothing happens. But sometimes you just hear a chord that you just kind of like, I like that. And so this is what came out of it.
So let's hear the actual song.
Yeah, so this is the first thing I sequenced then from just the tinkering around.
So let's play that.
Oh, you've heard that bit. Okay, so that was the piano bit. So we're going to play the actual song now. Give me a sec.